Hello. Good evening. Hope you're well. I'm going to be playing a little bit more Modern Warfare today. Hopefully much better than earlier's attempt. Try and level the final few weapons. Nearly got them all done.
Flash out! Changing mags.
Oh, we still leveling that one.
Team deathmatch. Enemy threats in the AO. Weapons hot.
Enemy at the cave entrance.
Allied cruise missile. Only 6. Taking contact.
Hot one.
Reloading.
Here we go.
Enemy UAV overhead.
In the corner.
Reloading. Check your bloody fire! We've taken the lead. Reloading. Friendly UAV out there.
Did that not hit him?
Let's go. Reloading. Enemies in the north.
How did that not hit him?
Enemy at the crossroads.
I don't think shotgun's the right choice for this map.
Enemy UAV overhead. Blotted him. Get it together. This ain't over yet.
Enemy at the cave entrance.
We've taken control. Enemy personal radar in the air. 30 seconds.
Get 1 minute.
Objective failed. Report for debrief.
Just trying to get this. Oh god, kids are out of force on the chat. Good job I'm hiding it. Oh no, I'm not. I thought my thing was hiding it. Just shotgun just isn't good for that map. That's a assault rifle map. Just ain't gonna work. Might work on here. Let's give it a go. Quite a small map. So, worth a shot.
Domination. Capture and defend the forward operating positions. Securing C. Assist your team at Bravo. Captured Charlie.
All out, reloading.
Securing Bravo.
Enemy in center.
In the lead.
Taking fire over here. All out, reloading.
We've lost B.
You got a problem?
Ah, for God's sake.
They've got 2 objectives. Keep hitting them.
Then you got the snipers everywhere.
Securing Alpha.
They're just camping.
One dead. Reloading.
Bitch.
Using a gun.
We're on out. Stand by.
Fight the bullet.
Oh my god.
Enemy in sight.
Nope.
UAV overhead.
Nope, nope, nope. Not playing that shit. Oh, those camping douchebags.
Reloading, stand by. Echo 3-1, Viper 1-1 on approach, ready for tasking. What's your position? Roger, 7-1, target acquired, weapons free in 5 seconds. Detonation is good, re-engaging. Target those vehicles. Don't go.
Thanks for following, Hannah Jones.
Team deathmatch.
Mucho appreciated.
Time to hunt. Control.
Reloading. I'm with you.
Fuck me. Useless.
Reloading.
Oh my god. What is wrong with me? Absolutely useless at this game.
We're losing ground.
Detonation is...
Two of them.
Reloading. Enemy precision airstrike inbound. Take cover.
Oh, for God's sake.
We're losing control.
I'll give you cover.
Enemy at the gun shop.
Echo 3-1.
Oh, I forgot. I can't see.
Airstrike inbound. Take
Can't
cover.
see him.
Don't go through one.
Enemy UAV overhead. Enemies halfway there. Snap it off.
Ah, for God's sake.
Target
Enemy cruise missile incoming. Enemy personal radar in the air.
Changing mag.
Enemy precision airstrike inbound. Take cover.
Enemy at the cafe.
Taking the lead. Friendly UAV online. Care package on the way.
Drop target
Enemy
confirmed.
above
Grid
you.
marked. Goal for
Good copy,
fire.
Tiger 2-300.
This is builder 2-0.
Target marked. Bring it down.
This is builder 2-0. Good copy. Cluster strike away.
Target down.
Less than a minute. Almost out of here.
Still firing.
So so close. That knife was so close.
Enemy UAV overhead. 30 seconds. Time's up. Get moving.
The enemy at the cafe.
Lord, and went after it. Well done.
The enemy at the cafe.
Do-do-do.
Team deathmatch. Enemy 3 PA on top.
Changing mag.
Enemy personal radar in the
Grenade
air.
out.
Care package arriving on station.
Location marked. Requesting airdrop.
Copy that. No match.
Popping smoke.
Shield turret.
Changing mag.
Deployed.
Fire.
Ugh.
One go for the third.
Shield turret active.
Halfway there. Step it up.
Oh my god.
Popping smoke.
Got a reload.
Enemy position in sight. Take cover.
Grenade out. Grenade out. Frag out.
Okay, go now.
All out. Reloading.
Go to fix it.
Battery depleted. Strike the turret.
Go, go, go.
Last mag.
Allied cluster strike inbound.
Go left. Left. In the back.
Enemy at the center.
We're down but not out. Let's go. Hard day, lads. Clean yourselves up.
Oh, Loopy Les, thank you for the Twitch Prime sub, much appreciated. Legend.
Hard point. Control the hard points as they are located. First hard point located. Secure that position. Capture the objective. Hard point contested.
Where are these people coming from? I cannot see that. It's so laggy.
Trophy system deployed.
Enemy. Got that one.
Hard point contested. Control the hard point. Enemy Enemy
Changing
UAV
mag.
overhead.
Changing
Go,
mag.
get to the next one. Cluster strike. Go for look. Hardpoint contested. Hardpoint contested. Hardpoint contested.
Builder 2-0, cluster strike away.
Drop target
Hardpoint
confirmed.
contested.
Enemy in the office. Good copy, Tiger 2-3 on approach and drop.
Hardpoint contested. Precision airstrike ready. 10 seconds. Get ready to move.
Locked on target. Fire.
Phoenix 3, good copy. Strike inbound. No hit on that round.
Hardpoint secure. Enemy UAV overhead.
Dropping ammo.
Enemy's got the hardpoint. Enemy cluster strike incoming. Take cover. 10 seconds. Get ready to move. Next hardpoint. Let's go. Enemy's got the hardpoint. Care package inbound.
One changing mag.
Cluster strike. Let's go for
Breach
launch.
locked. Go for fire.
This is Builder 2-0, good.
Enemy's halfway. Enemy UAV overhead. Enemy counter UAV online. Ten seconds. Get ready to move. Next hardpoint. Let's go. The enemy took the hardpoint. Enemy cluster strike incoming. Take cover. Hardpoint contested. Enemy UAV overhead.
Oh, you lucky bastard.
Get it together. Ready to move.
Changing mag. Reloading.
Enemy cluster strike incoming. We have taken the hardpoint. Enemy counter UAV online. The enemy took the hardpoint. Enemy VTOL jet in the AO.
Stop shooting.
the hard point. The hard point. Objective failed. Report for debrief.
by to move.
Reloading.
Next hard point, let's go. Enemy UAV overhead.
Enemy at the warehouse.
Got the hard point. Enemy cruise missile incoming.
Oh, for God's sake.
Hard point contested. Enemy VTOL in the AO. Get ready, we're about to move. Got the hard point. Go, get to the next one.
Got ammo here. Reloading.
Hardpoint contested.
What?
The enemy took the hardpoint. Hardpoint secure. Enemy taking the hardpoint. Enemy's got the hardpoint.
Enemy in the office.
Stand by to move. Friendly UAV overhead. Go, get to the next one.
Mark.
Have a paddy on stream. It's always a good idea. Fucking stupid game. Well, this is demoralising. As much as I preach a good game, this is shit. Oh, for God's sake. One more match to get ranked, probably be silver. What's time? Got last time. Oh dear. There's nothing going on. Boom. Juggle, juggle. Juggle, juggle. Oh. I'll be honest with you, I don't really have an opinion. I don't really know anything that's kind of going on. Yeah, that's a tough one. Soz. I mean, there's a large community of Jews in London, but I mean, I'm not from London, so I don't know what the crack is, to be fair. Is there something going on that I need to know about? I'll be honest with you, I don't tend to involve myself in religious things. I'm not religious. I don't really have an opinion on whether people should or shouldn't. That's up to them. But in terms of, like, obviously discrimination and shit like that, that's people just need to live and let live. But there shouldn't be any negative opinion against somebody else's beliefs. It's about as far as I go. Some people might think that is ignorant, but there's only so much stuff you can involve yourself in, right? What's your opinion on the Jewish community? I'm intrigued. I want to learn while I'm here playing this stupid game. And he's gone. What a strange scenario. Guy pops in, asks about my opinion on the Jewish community. I reply, and then he fucks off. Obviously looking for bait. People are weird. Let's get out of there. Do 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 do.
I've met lots of people who were suicidal because of that, but also unwilling.
Person is off, or maybe they're addicted to meth or something like that, where the addiction is more it's more short-term powerful than I would say than an alcohol addiction. They'll say anything, and the words are just tools used to get towards the goal. And if they happen to be deceptive, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're just practical tools to get towards the goal. And then when you get towards the goal and you take a nice shot of meth or something like that, you reinforce all those rationales that you used to get the drug, and then the next time you're even a better deceiver and liar. So, okay, so we're going to say motivations, one way of thinking about it is they set goals, but it's not the right way of thinking about it. They produce a whole framework of interpretation. And so we're going to think about that framework of interpretation. And then emotions emerge inside of that. So that's it. So the world is framed. Motivation set goals. You could say the world has to be framed. So motivation sets that frame. Goals, emotions, perceptions, and actions. And then actions track progress. So positive emotion says you're moving forward properly towards your goal. And if you encounter something you don't expect, you stop. That's anxiety. It's like, oh, we're not where we thought we were. And so we don't know what to do. So we should stop because we don't know where we are or what we're doing. Stop, frozen. And then the more powerful negative emotions like pain, they might make you get out of there. So emotions, forward, stop, reverse. That's your emotions within that motivated frame. So, and that's another example of how your mind is embedded in your body. You know, emotions are like they're offshoots of action tendencies. That's the right way to think about it. Because action is everything fundamentally. So what are some basic motivations? Most of these are regulated by the hypothalamus, by the way, and that tells you just how important a control system it is. The other thing that's useful to know about the hypothalamus is that it has projections going up from it that are like tree trunks, and inhibitory projections coming down that are like vines. So you can kind of control your hypothalamus as long as it's not on too much, but if it's on in any serious way, it's like it wins. So partly what you do to stop yourself from falling under the dominion of your hypothalamus is to never ever be anywhere where its action is necessary, right? You don't want to go into a biker bar because you might find yourself in a situation where panicked defensive aggression is immediately necessary. You probably don't want that. You don't want the panic, you don't want the terror, you don't want the frenzied fight, you don't want any of that. You don't want to have to run away in absolute panic. So you just don't go there. And a huge part of how we regulate our emotions is just by never going anywhere where we have to experience them. And so that has very little to do with internal inhibitory control and everything to do with staying where you belong. So, okay. So, basic motivations. Hunger, thirst, pain. Pain is not regulated by the hypothalamus. That's a different circuit. Anger / aggression. Thermoregulation. Panic and escape. Affiliation and care, sexual desire, exploration, play, and you can kind of break those in. You can kind of break those into the classic Darwinian categories too, and say, well, there's a set of motivations that go along with self-maintenance. That'd be your survival, ingestive and defensive. See, I've sort of coded them there. So the self-maintenance. There's an ingestive set of basic motivations that go with self-maintenance. You say that's hunger, thirst. There's a set of defensive motivations, pain, anger, thermoregulation, panic, and escape. And then there's motivations that are associated with reproduction, affiliation, care, and sexual desire. And then I put exploration and play sort of outside of that. I would say because those two things serve both of these approximately equally. So what I tried to do is take the basic motivations and then nest them inside a fundamental Darwinian framework so that you could see how the biological process of evolution has manifested itself and then sort of differentiated into these fundamental biological systems. So, okay, so this is a rat brain flat map. And so it's basically what you would see of a rat's brain if you flattened it out, unrolled it, flattened it out, and then made it two-dimensional. And you can see here, so this is the hypothalamus, and you can see that it's made out of these different nuclei. That's what they're called, and they sort of correspond to those shapes that I showed you in the human hypothalamus earlier. And you see that there's different systems. There's the system for eating and drinking is outlined in green, and the reproductive system, there's two of them, and they're outlined in I think it's red. Is that right? Yeah, reproductive is red, and the defensive ones are in magenta. And so those are the, think about those as the three fundamental value systems of living creatures with complex nervous systems as far as the hypothalamus is concerned. And then given what I told you about the hypothalamus, which is you hardly need the rest of your brain at all as long as you have a hypothalamus, it's worth thinking that those are very fundamental to value per se. Now, you might think if you only need the damn hypothalamus, why bother with the rest of the brain at all? Which is, that's a very useful question, especially because most creatures don't have much of a brain. So, but it seems to be something like Well, you've got your eating and drinking system, your reproductive system, and your defensive system. But the problem is that those things, first of all, can conflict. You know, are you too hungry to sleep or too sleepy to eat? So that's a pretty simple kind of contradiction. You know, are you more angry at your partner or do you want sexual relations more? So so they can conflict in the present, but then they can conflict with other people doing the same thing, and they can conflict across time. And so partly the reason that you need the rest of your brain is to solve the problems that emerge from the solutions that the hypothalamus offers. And so because you don't want to just eat and drink and reproduce and defend yourself. You want to eat now, later, tomorrow, next week, and next month, while you're able to engage in reproductive activity and defend yourself in multiple contexts with a whole bunch of people for as long as you can possibly manage it. And so you need the rest of your brain to calculate that. And so what the rest of your brain has to do, roughly speaking, is regulate these and also elaborate them up into like into something that's integrated inside you, which might roughly be your personality, and then so that that personality is integrated with the personality of other people. And so you can think about it as an emergent process. This is one of the things I really like about Piaget. He's so damn smart because Piaget is the only thinker I know, really, who really addressed the problem of the evolution of value systems. Like, he never nailed it down to the physiology because there wasn't enough known about physiology when he did his work. But it maps really nicely onto the physiology. But, you know, he said, well, but he got it right anyways. He said, you come into the world with a handful of pre-established reflexes. Okay, we're going to complicate that up a bit. No, you come into the world with a handful of micro-personalities that are centered around these fundamental motivational axes. Okay, and then that gets you started. And that has motor output as well as perceptions and all of that that's associated with it. And then as you interact initially, let's say with your mother, you start to learn how to integrate those things in some sort of social context because you form a relationship with your mother right off the bat. And so you're starting to figure out how to produce patterned and stable interactions between those motivational systems on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. And one of the things you do with kids, it's really important to do this with kids, is you want to get them onto some sort of a routine. Because what the routine is actually is the beginnings of the system that integrates all of these underlying biological systems into some sort of unity. Because they have to sleep and wake up. So you want to nail that down so it's predictable. You know, they have to eat, they have to stay warm, and they need to do that in a manner that's stable. And so it's to your great benefit as a parent that you get islands of stability planted in the life of your kid so that some of this gets simplified so that the kid isn't constantly preoccupied with domination by these different motivational systems. And so it's a useful thing to know because you might think, well, you don't want to impose any structure on your baby. It's like, no, wrong. You don't want to be a tyrant about it, but there's no difference between that structure and the emergence of the child's adaptation to the world. And to some degree what you're trying to do is free them up from arbitrary domination by these underlying motivational systems. You know, because if a baby gets too tired, it's a horrible little thing. It'll just scream at you non-stop and it's not happy about it. It's like it's not good for anyone for that to happen. And so the faster you have to do it in relationship with the child. You mean, some will sleep right away in a schedule almost immediately, and other kids are harder to get their circadian rhythms regulated. So you have to attend to the individual differences that characterize the child, but you're still trying to establish some stable harmony out of this mishmash of initial systems. So, all right, so that's sort of a physiological look at it. This is more of a conceptual look at it. So I said that each of these systems you can think about in a bunch of different ways. You can think about it as something that...
So, if you get a chance, go and check out a chap called Jordan Peterson. This is this guy. Where is a picture of him? This guy. He's a... I can't remember what he is.
I've met lots of people who were suicidal because of that.
Professor and clinical psychologist. But what he does is he puts the complexity of that into a very simple narrative. This particular video series I'm watching at the moment, Maps of Meaning, basically he begins this with a introduction about various things. Then he goes on to the story of Pinocchio and how it was very complexly created, and it is really quite interesting to listen to. I did it while I was painting my fence, but it goes into the detail that you just don't think about as a I guess as a normal person. I mean, you get the gist of Pinocchio, but what he does is he really dives into why the particular characters are doing what they do, why they're those characters, you know, kind of what they project, and it's just fascinating to listen to. Honestly, the guy is very clever. He's obviously done his reading of the major thinkers of history, and what their take is of psychology and things like that. But it's absolutely unreal series, really interesting to learn about, and the way it's put together is just it builds you up. So well worth starting at number 1 of this series, where it just takes you on a bit of a journey. It's very, very enlightening, and I highly recommend it.
Those things that are relevant to what you're trying to do in the kitchen. Everything else is zeroed out. You won't even really see it. And why would you? You want to see the things that are relevant to the task at hand. And so that's the thing that's so cool, I think, because what it means is that you see the things that are relevant to the task at hand. And so here's something to think about. Let's say that you see a whole bunch of things in the world that you don't want to see, you know, that make you constantly miserable and unhappy. One thing you might ask yourself is, are you sure that your goals are proper? Because your goals determine what you see. Now, not 100%, obviously. You can be thinking about the homework you're going to do and step off a curb and be hit by a van. It's like you're going to get hit by the van regardless of how you've oriented your perceptions, likelihood. So I'm not trying to argue for pure solipsism, but it is very interesting to consider that since you see in relationship to what you want, that a very large amount of what you see is dependent on what you're aiming at. And so one issue is, if your life is wretched and miserable, one thing to think about is whether or not what you're aiming at is the right thing to be aiming at. And nothing is exactly the wrong answer to that. I'm aiming at nothing. So okay, you're going to experience a tremendous amount of misery and not very much joy. So anyways, you've got this little frame. You're somewhere, and it's not good enough. And you're going somewhere else that's going to be better. And what better depends upon is the state of these underlying biological systems. And then more complexly, as those biological systems get integrated into a personality and into the social world, then the frame and the goal is going to be dependent on that more complex hierarchical organization. So you're not in here because you're hungry. You're in here because if you get a degree, maybe you don't ever have to be hungry. So the hunger is properly incorporated into your, you don't want to be cold, you don't want to freeze to death in the winter, you don't want to be on the street. You know, so your higher order goals are long-term, socially negotiated solutions to the problems that are implicit in your being. That might be one way of thinking about it. And the micro elements of this, so you could say, I'm hungry, that's a physiological state and a conception. I have a vision of how I'm going to solve that, but then, and that's an abstraction. But what you do to transform point A into point B is not an abstraction. You act. You know, so if you're hungry, you actually move your body, say down from the second floor into the kitchen, and you arrange things so that there's transformations in the world. And that's a good way of thinking about the relationship between the mind and the body. Your hypothetical solution to your problem, that's the mind. but the manner in which you incarnate that solution, that's no longer abstract. So, you know, people are always trying to solve the mind-body problem. And that's, as far as I can tell, that's how you solve it, is you have abstractions, but they're not abstractions that are representations of the world. They're abstractions that are representations of action patterns. And the way those are implemented in the world is that you act them. And so it's strange because you've got this weird level of control, you know. I can move my arm, I seem to be able to do that voluntarily, but I really have no idea how I'm doing it. Like, I don't have conscious access exactly to the musculature, except technically, and I certainly have no idea what I'm doing chemically to make those muscles transform. But my abstractions ground out in this movement, and I can observe the movement and modify it, but I have no conscious access whatsoever to the microprocesses that are making that possible. I have no idea why that is. Probably because I'm not smart enough. That would be my guess, right? Is you're only going to, evolution is only going to allow your mind to control those elements of your being that you're smart enough to control. And so you don't get voluntary control over your heartbeat, for example, because you'd just forget, and then you'd be wandering around, and then you'd forget to beat your heart, and bang, you'd be dead. So you don't get to do that. So, all right, so all these different, I classified these again as self-propagation and self-maintenance motivations. And so if you're too hot, well, you want to go somewhere cooler, and if you're too cool, you want to go somewhere hotter. And same if you're thirsty and hungry. And for self-propagation, well, you get lonesome, and maybe, you know, you have some sexual desire, and each of those different systems competes for access to this central frame, and that's something like the contents of your consciousness at any given time. So up pops a desire, but it's the wrong way of thinking about it, because a desire sounds like something that's pushing you forward, but the desire is goal, framework, emotion, perception, action pattern, all at the same time. It's a little personality, or it's a little story. Actually, when you describe the operation of one of these things, that's when you're telling a story. So I was somewhere, I needed something, I went and got it. It's a boring little story, but that's the basic unit of a story, right? Because I don't care to hear what you're doing unless you had a reason for doing it. So I just say, what's the point of the story? And the point of the story is the point. It's directional, right? It says, I went from here to there, that's the point. Here's how I did it, that's the point. And you're interested in that because maybe you want to know how to do it too. And you won't have to struggle through it like I did. You could just listen. And so we're always throwing these little units of information back and forth to each other. And for good reason. I want to know what your point is, because better I learn it from you than make all the mistakes that you had to make when you were learning it. And human beings, we got that figured out, that's for sure. So, okay, I'm going to just explain this, and then we'll stop. All right, so we're in one of those frames now, and we're going from point A to point B. And so the question is, how does the world lay itself out? Okay, so the first thing to understand, and this is partly the reason I showed you the gorilla video, is that the first thing a frame does for you is make almost everything irrelevant. And that's so great, because that's what you want. You want almost everything to be irrelevant, because otherwise you're going to be so flooded with information that that's what hallucinogens do, at least in their initial stages, is they take away that filter and make everything relevant. You can read about that in Huxley's Doors of Perception. He does a great job of describing the initial stages of a mescaline experience. And what happens is that all of the memory, in some sense, that regulates his perceptions is stripped off. And so he sees everything glowing and alive and magical, like he'd never encountered it before, which is exactly how you would see something if all your memory about it was gone. And so he sees things as way more complex and interesting than he normally sees them. Well, that's fine, but you know, if you're like that all the time, then you know, you end up in a ditch starving to death or something. Like it's not commensurate with normal life. That's what it looks like. And so your perceptions are just shrunk and restricted to the bare minimum necessary to keep you moving in the direction that you're moving. All right, so the first thing you want to do is you want to make things irrelevant. Now, if you're with someone in a relationship, partly what you want them to do is to help you continue making most of their possibility irrelevant. It's polite Because one of the things, so you say, well, we have friendship, let's say, we have a friendship, okay? So that means you've agreed to act in a friendly manner towards me and to support me. There's all sorts of other ways you could act, like a myriad of them. And I'm going to do the same for you. So we're simpler to each other than we would normally be. And then you go and do something that betrays me. It's like, bang, that whole simplification is gone. And all those parts of you that were supposed to be irrelevant because we were playing the same game, they're dead relevant, and I don't know who the hell you are. And so that's really rough, and people do not like that. It's this emergent mismatch between their desires and the way the world is manifesting itself. So one of the issues of complexity is that when you hit an obstacle, everything that you have agreed with other people to make irrelevant is irrelevant. And that's generally a disconcerting experience. Now you can, you might want to toy a little bit with that in a relationship, so maybe you encourage your partner to dress differently, or you go do different things or something because you don't want to be stuck in exactly the same old rut. And so what you'll agree is how you can both deviate an interesting amount. But that's voluntary and controlled. It's not the same at all as having that little mess of 80 million snakes pop up right in front of you, which is the last thing you want to have happen. And so it's so weird, because one of the things that we're striving to do constantly is to keep most of the world irrelevant. And our cultural systems are designed precisely for that purpose. And part of what you do when you disrupt them is you force people to consider a far more range of relevance than they are even vaguely comfortable or vaguely competent to manage. And it just burns them to a crisp. Because what your body does is, if all of a sudden everything around you is irrelevant, like I could say, you're stripped naked, I take you in a helicopter, drop you right into the middle of a jungle at midnight. It's like, you're not bored. Standing there, frozen, paralyzed, everything is interesting. Well, too bad for you, because too interesting is very little different from terrifying. And so, your heart rate's going to be at 160 for like 2 days, and then something will eat you and your problems will be over. So, all right, so this diagram basically suggests this is how you break up the world when you're going from point A to point B. It renders almost everything irrelevant. Hooray. And then what happens is the rest of the world is broken up into obstacles that get in your way and tools that facilitate your movement forward. And that's actually what you see when you come into a place. Like when you come into this room, these are obstacles insofar as you can't walk through them, and those are tools insofar as you can sit on them and watch the class. And this is a tool, and these are tools, and this is a tool, and I'm a tool for, although I'd never admit it, but anyways, I'm a tool because you need to take this class in order to advance towards your degree. And so basically what you see in the world are entities of functional significance, and those are not objects. They are not the same thing. So, and that's very much worth considering, because see, we're trying to build up a case, at least in part, for analyzing the nature of the structures within which you organize your perceptions. And we tend to think that those are predicated on object perception. It's not true. It's not true. They're predicated on relevance conception. Does it help you? Does it get in your way? Or is it irrelevant? That's what you want to know. If it helps you, you're happy about it. If it gets in your way, you're negatively predisposed towards it. If it's irrelevant, it's invisible. And so if your little scheme is functional, your little frame is functional, then most of the things that you encounter are mildly positive. And that's how you know that you know what you're doing. That's how you validate the entire frame. So, okay, good. So I guess the case that I was making last time, at least in part, was that one of conceptualizing the fundamental problem that human beings face is to conceptualize it as an ongoing struggle with complexity. And complexity emerges as a consequence of the sort of finite boundedness of individual consciousness and the incredible excess of the unbounded everywhere else, even including underneath that consciousness, because of course your individual consciousness depends on the function, or is related to the function of things that are so complex you can't even understand it. So there you are, surrounded by some things that you understand in an ocean of things that you don't understand at all, and including things about yourself. And it's not obvious at all how people solve that problem, because in some sense it's not solvable. The fact that you don't have the cognitive resources or the conceptual resources to understand everything that you need to understand in order to properly orient yourself in the world. Now, obviously, partly the way we deal with that is that we cooperate with other people, and so that radically multiplies our resources, incredibly multiplies our resources. So, and it's something to consider always when, you know, so much of the political dialogue that surrounds us now consists of a critique of cooperative societies and an analysis of their oppressive nature. And of course that's true, because any cooperative system that specifies a certain endpoint and produces a value hierarchy of some sort also simultaneously forces things into that value system and then rank orders people according to the value structure. And so there's an oppressive element to it. But compared to being naked in chaos, generally it's better. Now, it doesn't always have to be, because it can get murderous, but generally speaking, well, look, we're social animals, it doesn't matter. Our evolutionary pathway has already taken us here, and so we're individuals, but we're unbelievably social, and so that's that. So as far as I can tell, we'd have to be completely different creatures not to take advantage of and fall prey to the problems with social being. All right, so I think the way that the problem of complexity has been solved, and this is the best argument I know of for the truth of the Darwinian notion of evolution. Now, I don't think that our models of evolution are complete by any stretch of the imagination. I know they're not, partly because of recent work done on epigenetics, which suggests that you can inherit acquired traits. Right? And when I went to university, when I started going to university in the 1980s, that was heresy, really. Like, no, you cannot inherit acquired traits, but actually you can inherit acquired traits. That's the field of epigenetics studies that. And that's a radical shift in perspective, because we also don't know exactly what that means across any length of time. And when you're thinking about evolutionary lengths of time, you're thinking about 3.5 billion years, because that's the span of time over which life evolved. And so even things that don't have a overwhelmingly marked potency for one generation can be unbelievably powerful across time. And then there's also the issue of sexual selection, because you know, you'll hear Darwinists continually describe the world and the evolutionary world as a place of randomness. And that's not true. And I don't know why they make that statement. The mutations are random or quasi-random, because we don't understand mutations that well yet either. And most mutations are deadly, right? Most mutations are deadly. There's a set of them that are harmful but not deadly. And then there's a tiny, tiny proportion that could, in principle, produce some benefit to the next generation, assuming environmental shift, say, in the direction of the mutation. So, and there's a randomness element to that. We know that. I mean, part of the reason that you mutate, or your cells mutate, your DNA mutates, is because of background levels of radioactivity. And a lot of that's a consequence of solar activity, right? So cosmic rays come zipping through the atmosphere and they nail your DNA and produce minor alterations, and that's a mutation. And if you crank up the background radiation rate, like say around Chernobyl, then the mutation rate rises, and there's definitely a random element to that. And it's necessary for there to be a random element, because as far as I can tell, the only way you can beat a random environment is by producing random changes, right? So, you know the idea, basically. The environment isn't some static place that's selecting for higher and higher levels of fitness, or not in any it's certainly not doing that in any static way. And so it's shifting around randomly. And then, you know, you have a structure that's been, your species has a structure that's a consequence of this immense evolutionary journey, and it's moderating itself randomly within certain parameters, the parameters being that most mutations will kill you, like alterations in your fundamental form generally tend to kill you, so they're incremental. And so the mutations are random and they match, hopefully they match the randomness in the environmental shift, and so you can more or less keep up that way. But then there's additional complicating factors, and they're not trivial. And one of them is whatever epigenetics does. We don't know anything about that yet. But the second one is sexual selection. And sexual selection is no joke. It could be the primary thing. It's certainly one of the primary things that's driven human evolution. And I think you can say that you think about the environment again. Well, let's think about the environment. So you have a dominance hierarchy, and that's really an old structure. The dominance hierarchy is 300 million years old, because it emerged pretty much whenever there was a nervous system, emergent nervous system, and whenever animals had to occupy the same territory, they automatically organized themselves into something approximating a dominance hierarchy. So it's a very, 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 very old structure. It's older than trees. It's older than flowers. It's old. And as far as real goes from a Darwinian sense, permanent is real. And so when you can say, well, you know, our arboreal ancestors adapted themselves to trees, and so the tree was around long enough to be a feature of the environment. But the dominance hierarchy has been around a lot longer than trees. And you can think of the dominance hierarchy both as an adaptation to the environment, because you'd kind of think about the dominance hierarchy as a cultural construct. But if a cultural construct lasts long enough, then it becomes part of the environment. And so the dominance hierarchy is part of the environment. And what seems to happen, roughly speaking,
A paw third. A pother.
Speaking, and this is an oversimplification, but we'll go with it, is that males have a dominance hierarchy, and there's a relatively small number of males that are relatively successful, and those successful males have preferential access to female reproductive capacity, either because the females actively choose the more dominant males, which is very, very common, or because the more dominant males chase all the less dominant males away, so that even if the females don't exercise choice, which they often do, then the only males left around that can serve as reasonable mating partners are the more powerful ones. And so you think you get two really radical determiners of evolution as a consequence of that. One is that each, I'm not talking about female dominance hierarchies at the moment, but I can talk about them, but that's why this is an oversimplification. But what happens is that the males obviously are selected for their ability to move up dominance hierarchies, obviously, because the ones that are at the top of the dominance hierarchy reproduce preferentially. And so that means the male dominance hierarchy becomes a method of selection. But then allied with that is the female proclivity for choice on whatever dimension the dominance hierarchy happens to be arranged. And so then female sexual selection also becomes a radical, non-random selector of what genetic material is going to move into the next generation. And so I fail to see how any of that can be separated from the emergence of complex nervous systems and mind over the course of evolution, because creatures aren't making random choices. They're not random at all. So we even know such things like, imagine a peacock's tail, you know. And it's covered with eyes, which is quite interesting, because eyes, of course, attract attention. And lots of animals have evolved eye-like markings. Like moths, there's moths that, when they unfold their wings, they have two big eyes on the back of them. And that's to keep birds from eating them, right? Because the birds don't like being stared at, so they stay away from the moths. But so a peacock's tail is nothing but eyes. And so it's very attractive, and it shimmers. And there's something about it that's beautiful, which is quite interesting, too. The females have obviously been selecting the male peacocks for beauty. They have this insane tail. Well, so the evolutionary biologists have thought, well, what possible utility could that tail be? Is it just maybe the females got fixated on tail, so to speak, and you know, you got a Baldwin effect loop going there, and the male peacocks just got bigger and bigger tails, and it's just like an evolutionary dead end. It's, you know, it's a positive feedback system that's gone out of control. But they have done things that, like, look at the symmetry and breadth, say, or the symmetry and size and overall quality of the male peacock's tail as a marker for physical health. So reduced parasite load, for example. And it does turn out that the healthier male peacocks have better tail display. And so what the females seem to be doing is using some marker or some set of markers as a proxy indicator for health. And I think you could say reasonably that female human beings do the same thing to male human beings. And there's some of that vice versa too. Like, we evaluate each other, for example, for symmetry, which is one of the elements of beauty, because healthier people tend to be more symmetrical. And lots of animals use symmetry. Butterflies, if butterflies won't mate with another butterfly if it deviates from symmetry by the tiniest amounts you can imagine. So symmetry is a marker, and there's other markers like shoulder width to waist width is one, and waist width to hip width is another. That's usually what males use that to evaluate females in part. So there's lots of markers of health. But it also looks to me like the data worldwide seems to indicate that women, so imagine that women mate across dominance hierarchies and up, socioeconomically speaking. And on average, across cultures, women go for men who are about 4 to 5 years older. You know, it varies. In the Scandinavian countries, that's shrunk a little bit, but not that much. And in other cultures, it's bigger. I would say that depends to some degree on difficulty of establishing economic independence, right? Because in richer countries, it's easier to have enough economic independence if you're a male to to be a useful participant in the process of having children. But it doesn't matter, cross-culturally, it's still across and up, where men mate across and down. They don't care much about socioeconomic status. It doesn't seem to be part of their selection method, generally speaking. So I think that part of that is also the ability of women to select for male health. It's something like that, because it isn't only that, because if you're healthy and energetic, you're much more likely to be successful, because it's very hard to be successful if you're ill, obviously. I mean, so, because the competition is just too high. And both genders, both sexes select each other for attractiveness, both select for intelligence, both select for personality, although there are differences there in terms of what's stressed. But so I think you can derive a couple of things out of this, and this is where I think people are different than other animals. Importantly different is that, so you imagine that there's tremendous selection pressure towards the production, let's say, of men who are good at climbing male dominance hierarchies, or climbing the male dominance hierarchy. But the thing that's so interesting about people is that we've multiplied our dominance hierarchies. You know, if you take an animal that's got a rather static behavioral pattern, then there's a single hierarchy. Elephant seals are a good example of that. So elephant seals, the males are absolutely massive. They're way, way bigger than the females. And they basically have harems, roughly speaking. And they use physical prowess as their marker of status, essentially. And obviously size is a huge part of that, because otherwise the male elephant seals wouldn't be as, they're massive, these things. They're absolutely enormous. And so it's just power / health, you know, maybe aggression, something like that. It's whatever makes them more suitable for the kind of physical combat that elephant seals engage in. So, and the degree to which power is associated with dominance status in those sorts of situations seems to be associated with the size differential between males and females. So the more power is an issue with regards to male competence, the larger the males are compared to the females, and the more likely the males are going to have a harem relationship with the females. And you see that a little bit in human beings, because men are bigger than women. They're not overwhelmingly bigger, that's sexual dimorphism. And you know, there's some men that are smaller than some women, but on average men are taller and they have more upper body strength and so forth. So there is a power element to male competition, but it's not as extended as it would be among animals, say like elephant seals. So in the elephant seal, you see maybe there's one stable set of traits that's being selected for that makes the males more likely to reproduce. But human beings, we're very weird creatures because we're so conceptually flexible. And so what seems to have happened, maybe males started selecting each other for in dominance competitions for something like cognitive flexibility and conscientiousness. It's something like that. So that would be the ability to abstractly represent the world, and then the ability to operate effectively within it, to represent yourself socially in a way, and then to carry through with that, because that enables people to trust you. So it's something like that. And so that produced cortical expansion, and then women were selecting men who were good at that, and that produced cortical expansion. And then there's an arms race between women and men with regards to intelligence. So the women kept up, or they certainly kept up with intelligence as the evolutionary cycle continued. But one of the consequences of selection for cortical expansion and increased cognitive flexibility was that the number of dominance hierarchies that human beings could produce started to multiply, right? Because there's all sorts of ways that you can be successful. You think about how many ways you can be successful in a modern culture, and you can be successful in dimensions that aren't really even associated with each other. So you can be successful socially, that's what an extrovert would do. You could be successful in terms of intimate relationships, that's what an agreeable person would do. A disagreeable person would be more successful with regards to competition. A person who's high in neuroticism would be trying to protect themselves and to establish some sort of security. An open person would be looking for a flexible, creative environment. And so there's this multiplicity of ways that you can establish a dominance hierarchy and be successful in it. And if you're creative, you can come up with your own damn dominance hierarchy, which is exactly what you're doing if you're creative, right? You spin up a game that's your game, and then you make the rules. And that's hard, because if you make a new game with new rules, it's hard to monetize it. But you can be the best at playing that game, and so that's a huge advantage to being creative if you can pull it off. So then you think, well, what's happened among human beings is the multiplication of the set of possible dominance hierarchies, so it's become very broad, and then you could say, well, what's driving selection now is the ability to be successful across multiple sets of dominance hierarchies. And that accounts, at least in part, for our cognitive flexibility. And so that's really what a human being is. A human being is a creature that has high potential for succeeding across a very wide range of potential human dominance hierarchies. And so that gives us our transformative psyche. That's the niche that we've both produced and occupy. And I think it's out of that hero mythology emerges fundamentally. Because I think what the hero is, the mythological hero, is a representation of that part of the psyche that's particularly good at being successful across sets of dominance hierarchies. It's a very, very biological way of thinking about it. And I've thought about this for a long time. I can't see any way that just can't be the case. I mean, how else could it work? If we had a fixed behavioral pattern like beavers, you know, you're the most successful beaver if you build the best dam, it's like fine, then you know what's going to be selected for. But that isn't what people are like, and it's also why we're so multi-purpose, you know. We have hands. What's a hand for? What's the evolutionary function of a hand? Well, you can't specify that. You could say it's something like, well, a hand is useful for doing a whole bunch of different things with. Well, and mouth, tongue, same thing. What are words for? Well, it's the same thing. They're for communicating a very wide range of information. It's something like that. So we're these weird general purpose animals. You know, we're not great at any one thing, but we can swim better than most terrestrial animals. You know, we can run faster than most animals, and we can certainly run longer. Like a human being can run a horse to death over the course of a week if they're in good shape. So like we're really good at being a multi-purpose entity, like a rat, you know, they call rats weedy species because they can be anywhere. They don't have a specific niche. Like, you know, there's animals down in the Amazon that they're specialized for like one tree, you know, or one type of tree in one tiny little area. That's not what human beings like, is we're like cockroaches or rats, which is a nasty comparison, but we can go anywhere and thrive. And so being particularly good at that, being particularly good at being able to go anywhere and thrive also seems to me to be a canonical element of the hero mythology. So okay, all right. Now, I started to introduce all those topics because I was trying to address the issue of how it is that we've come to deal with the fact that things are so complex that we can't deal with them. And so a huge part of the answer to that is the Darwinian answer. One is, well, you keep up with things you can't keep up with by changing unpredictably. So here's an example. You know, sometimes if you're driving down the road and there's a deer on the road, maybe you'll run into it and instead of jumping out of the way, it sort of jumps randomly and then you run into it. You think, well, that's a pretty stupid strategy. It's like natural selection's at work there, but it turns out that deer jump randomly when wolves are chasing them. Well, why would you do that? Well, because you can't predict it, right? If something horrible is after you, acting unpredictably is actually a pretty good strategy, and that's basically what mutation does. It means the horrible thing that's after you always is the rapid transformation of the environment, and the only thing you can possibly do in that case is capitalize on chance. Okay, so that's one thing. So that's partly why the Darwinian story, I think, has to be right, because the environment does move unpredictably. And the only way you can keep up with something that's unpredictable is to generate variance and hope that one of them has drawn the lucky lottery card. But then there's these additional issues, which is that we also seem to be tightly selected for the capacity to cooperate and compete, so that multiplies our cognitive ability. That's a huge part of it. And then we also seem to have constructed ourselves, so to speak, through sexual choice into these general purpose problem-solving creatures. And so we've internalized some of the Darwinian process. So you think, well, most animals will produce variants of themselves physically, and then most of those variants die. But human beings have built a mechanism, let's say, that's like a game engine. I think that's a really good, you know how there are game engines now that people have devised. They're computational devices, and you can take a game engine and you can generate games with it, like computer games. So the game engine is a mechanism for producing games. Well, that's what our brains are like. Our brains are game engines for producing games. And so what happens is that when you think, you produce an avatar of yourself, you produce a fictional world that avatar inhabits, and maybe you produce multiple fictional worlds and multiple avatars. That's the you that could be tomorrow, which is what you're doing when you're planning. And you walk the avatar through its potential routes, and those that look good you keep, and those that don't look good you kill. And so then you can embody the ideas that you keep and act those out, and hopefully the idea is that when you embody them, you're successful and you don't get killed. And so we've also when we've been selecting each other for cognitive prowess, we've been selecting ourselves for the ability to generate avatars out of ourselves and kill them instead of dying. It's unbelievably brilliant, and that's really akin to the human discovery of the future, right? The future is a place where variants of you could exist. It's something like that, and other animals don't seem to be able to do that. So we're very sneaky, and well, so far it doesn't seem to be working too badly, although we haven't been around for very long, right? I mean, human beings of our particular subspecies, about 150,000 years, something like that, which is, from an evolutionary time frame, it's like, it's nothing, you know. It's 2,000.
Hard
Slinging a Stella. Slinging a Stella. Slinging a Stella.
Reloading.
Stella.
Taking the hard point. UAV overhead. Taking the hard
Enemy
point.
at the cargo container.
Ready to move. Enemy taking the hard point. Enemy UAV overhead. Enemy taking the hard point. 30 seconds. Time's up. Move your arms. The enemy took the hard point. Down.
Enemy at the fort.
Domination.
Planting explosion. Got moved.
Losing B.
Reloading.
Enemy at the center.
We've taken the lead. Cluster strike is going to north. Hostiles taking Bravo. Hostiles taking Bravo.
Reloading 2-0. Good job.
Reloading.
Copy. Nomad 2.
Reloading.
Cluster strike is going to north. Hostiles
Hold
at
for
Bravo
fire on this
Charlie.
target.
Reloading 2-0. Good job. Strike away.
Frag out.
Securing Charlie. Ready to go on station. You're needed at Bravo. Arriving on station.
Enemy in the dump.
Team at A! Securing C.
Copy. Nomad 2.
Be advised, friendly precision airstrike inbound. UAV overhead. Personal radar. Got two objectives. Lock it down. Not needed to see. You're needed to Bravo. Be advised, friendly precision airstrike. Securing Bravo.
Good copy.
UAV overhead. Halfway there. Strip it up. Securing Alpha open.
I'm not the other.
Taking the lead. Hostiles at Bravo. Hostiles at Bravo. Alpha secure. Be advised.
Believe in second chances.
Copy that. Enemy at the cargo container.
Friendly counter UAV
Grenade out! Grenade out!
Des fêtes. Oh, c'est bizarre. Sans blague.
Quoi?